Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of my Bigfoot sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
My Bigfoot sighting was probably one of the scariest events of my life. It happened in roughly July of 2021 in South Central Georgia, on the place that I've lived for my entire life, on about 120 acres. It goes back farther than that, though, to when I was a kid. As a kid, when I was playing in the yard or riding four-wheelers or anything, I would always have rocks knocking. I'd hear them up in the woods when I was in our yard. I would always notice trees fell down on a particular trail that we used to ride on, and they'd always start falling in a certain spot, and there'd always be trees falling there. Kids not knowing any better, we would always move them and just keep going. Looking back now, I wish we hadn't. We would always be sitting in our yard, hanging out, doing what kids do, and we'd always have a feeling of being watched. So we'd go around the house looking in windows, seeing if our parents were looking at us, or we never thought there was something in the woods looking at us. We were just kids. We didn't know any better. Well, as I got older and I continued to hear knocking in the woods and something that sounded like people talking, I always just assumed it was our neighbors. But our neighbors through the woods were 1,000 yards away. But I didn't know any better. One time I was sitting in my deer stand in the bottom of a holler, and I heard someone talking. Sounded like they were within 50 feet of me. So I grabbed my phone and texted my dad, "Are you behind me? Are you around me?" And he just texted back no with a question mark. So I continued to sit there, and I realized whatever was talking was circling around me. I thought it was one of our neighbors who was trespassing, or, one of their kids was looking to hunt on our property. So I just stood up in the deer stand, started shouting, fired off a round. Sat back down, went back to, I think I was reading a book at the time. A few minutes later, I heard it walking around a little bit closer. And whatever it was that day circled me until the sun went down. And I wasn't old enough to leave the deer stand by myself. So that night when my dad came and got me, I'll never forget the feeling of seeing that flashlight come bebopping through the woods, because something was surrounding me on 2 feet, and I thought I had an idea of what it was. And if I would have seen anything, I would have been right at eye level with him and paralyzed by fear. The same year, I believe, that the circling happened, we had a dead deer probably 15 feet from our front porch in our yard. Something had wrung this deer's neck. He was a pretty big buck, probably 150, 175 pounds. Something just turned his head around, and he was laying in our front yard. We knew no one around us that was hunting besides us. We had a gate on our property, so no one could get back there to us. My dad always played it off like he wasn't worried about it. It was just one of those things that happened. But I always had my concerns about what it could have been. Could it have been the thing that was throwing rocks at me and knocking and talking while I was sitting in a deer stand? Well, fast forward a few years later to this summer. I'm home. My roommate comes home with me to work a summer job, and he always believed that there was something out there, but he didn't know what. And I had told him about some of my experiences, and he decided that, hey, I want to go and see what you got. I want to see this experience that you're having. So one of the first weekends he's home with me, I take him to where my deer stand used to be, and we walk down towards the holler, and I'm just giving him instructions, directions of where things are, and we continue to walk the holler. As we continue to walk the holler, I tell him about a deer stand that my dad built when I was 8 or 9. He and I built it into a tree. And if you've hunted a lot in your life, you know you don't build a deer stand in a tree unless you plan on hunting that spot for a long time. My dad hunted that stand one time and never went back. I was never allowed to go back down there after that. I was never allowed to ride a four-wheeler back there. Being back there was off limits completely to me as a kid. I always thought that's where, I guess, Bigfoot lived to me. I never had any confirmation. I just thought he's out here somewhere, and this is logically where he would be at. But my dad would never talk about it. I would mention it to him, and he would kind of laugh it off, like, oh yeah, there's just nothing back there. There's no deer back there. Any good hunter knows that you don't build a deer stand in a tree unless you've seen deer. And he killed deer back there the year before. So I know there were deer back there. But I also know what else is back there now. So as my roommate and I are walking through this holler, we just get an eerie feeling of being watched. And we're not sure if it's us wanting to see something or something seeing us, what it could have been. But we stop and listen every few steps. And my roommate whoops one time. And about 50 yards in front of us, we got a response of a whoop back. He didn't hear it, but I did. So we kept walking very slowly, very quietly, not trying to creep up on anything, because you know just as well as I do, you're not going to creep up on this thing. And by no means were we hunting him. We walked probably 20 feet, and I'm looking around, and so is he, because we don't want to be stalked, I guess would be the word. You know, if you know I'm here, I'd like to know you're here too. So at about our 3 o'clock, we see a jet black figure that's about 4 to 6 feet tall. He's leaning out around a tree, peering at us, so you can only really see a shoulder and the head. He's probably 50 to 60 feet away from us. And we sit there and stare at him for what feels like forever, but it was only probably 20 seconds at the most. Couldn't really make out a lot of features because he was underneath the cover of all the trees. I can just tell you he was jet black. We continue walking and go about 5 or 10 more feet and look back where we were looking at whatever this was, and it was gone. My roommate and I look at each other and we know what we just saw. We take a few more steps, and where this thing was would be now at about our 4 or 5 o'clock. So at our 10 o'clock, we hear something start banging on what sounds like a 55-gallon drum or a piece of sheet metal with its fist. And it really sounds like an ape going ballistic. And all of a sudden, my blood runs cold. I know what's happened. We draw. I carry a 9. He carries a 45. We drew out of fear, not out of wanting to harm these creatures, because we think we got between a juvenile and a mother, and getting in between a juvenile and the mother with any species is going to get you killed, and we know that. So as this creature is screaming and banging, we get back to back, and we know immediately we got to get out of here. We've entered unwanted territory. She thinks that was her baby whooping at her, and it was us. Mama is not happy with us. So as we start to make our way up the hill, together, we hear chattering. It sounds like 3, maybe 4 other creatures chattering, which would be, if the banging is coming from our 10 o'clock, from roughly our between 12 and 2 o'clock, with another creature at our 4 to 5 o'clock. So we head out the best way we know how, which is at roughly 3 o'clock, because going back down into the holler is just going to put us into a pinching situation that's not good for us. So as we start to head up this hill and we hear laughing and chattering, I'm leading us out because I know where I am and he's new to the area. I look up and I see this deer stand that my dad and I built 10 years ago. I finally understood why I was never allowed to go back there. I genuinely feared for my life in that moment and knew nothing else but don't run, be safe, and get out of here. We were followed probably 400 yards all the way out, straight uphill, by at least 2 of these creatures. It was one of the scariest experiences of my life. We went in the house. We had multiple shocking events happening. I blacked out to the creature screaming because I heard the talking and laughing. My roommate heard the creature banging and screaming and did not hear the talking. So we both heard different things, but we were 5 feet apart. And we were focused on getting out of there. We got home, collected our thoughts, changed our pants basically, and kind of tried to discuss what just happened. I mean, we weren't sure, but we pretty much knew what just happened. And decided we're not going to go back there anymore. So as we continue on throughout the few weeks that we're still at home for summer break, we would always go outside and feel the presence of being watched. We knew we upset them because we think we walked into their house unexpectedly somehow. So as we were being watched at my house, we would be looking in the woods at all times, trying to put eyes on this thing. You know, just trying to be as vigilant as possible. There are a few instances that we had where we would see a silhouette moving. We would see a black spot, look away, and then there's sun shining through trees again there. So we knew we were being watched. There wasn't a lot of fear because you're at home. There's not a lot of fear when you're in your own yard mostly, but there was still fear there. One of the biggest, most important nights that I can recall is we're outside with my parents and some of their friends, and we are about at dusk. There's just enough tree light coming through the trees that you can see through the trees, but it's not coming over the trees. We're just hanging out outside, and my roommate taps me and goes, "I just heard 2 knocks from down there." And I heard it too, but I wasn't going to say anything. So we're kind of looking around, trying to figure out, you know, if we're still being watched or what 2 knocks from down there means. Then we see an arm swing, walking down the hill towards where these knocks came from. We think it was a shift change. A few minutes later, we go to look in the same general area of where we saw the arm swing. And it's dark now, so I pull out a flashlight. And it's a pretty strong lens. It'll go 100 yards. And we're looking maybe 50 feet in front of us, right inside the tree line, about 5 or 10 feet. And we see this black leg. It's got to be his leg because it's at our eye level, which is ground level in the woods. And when I tell you this leg was probably the size of a dinner plate on the ground, I'm not exaggerating. So I hold the light on the leg. I'm frozen. because I know what this is. I know what he's here for. He's not here to hurt us. He's just here to make sure that we don't go back in there. So I try shining the light up, trying to look, see if I can get more bodily features, but he's in vines, so you can't see anything, but I'm sure he could see us very well. We decide it's time to go in the house, go in and call it a night. And the next day, we decide we want to recreate it. I go up there. I'm 6'4", 150 pounds. I was not near as big as this thing was. So I send my roommate up there, and he's probably 6 foot, 200 pounds. He's a semi-pro bodybuilder, so he's a big guy. And I send him up there, and I'm telling you, the size of this thing's leg was uncomparable to a human being. The next instance I had was I was out on a tractor one day clearing some fields up in the back of our property, not really near where the big instance really happened. I'm kind of just riding through this field that's already kind of low, and I see a fawn, maybe a few weeks old, the size of a small dog. And this thing is just ripped in half. It looks like something picked this thing up and pulled the front half away from the back half and just pulled it apart and left it there in the middle of the road for someone to see. And we took that as a sign. So we don't go back there anymore either. Then, probably a week or so later, I was fixing up a camper at my grandparents' house, which is on the same piece of property, probably 100 yards away from my house. We were out there working pretty late at night, probably for 7 or 8 days in a row. And on the last night we were out there, we stayed until probably 11:30 to 12 o'clock at night. And we kept noticing noises in the woods. We were kind of at peace with being watched, but it was kind of getting old, the fear of, what if we misstep here? What's going to happen if we do something wrong here? So I get in my truck. I've got light bars all over it, and I turn every single one of them on and point it in the direction of what we're hearing. And just inside the tree line, maybe 15 feet, 20 feet, my roommate goes, "There he is." So I rush over to where he is, and sure as the world, there is I would call him a ginger color, maybe a brownish color. And he was every bit of 8.5 to 9 feet tall, just looking at me. I mean, we were making eye contact for I don't know how long. But as soon as we made eye contact, I felt anger come over me. I mean, I was upset that, we were having to live in this fear of, what if we do something wrong? But I mean, this anger that came over me made me feel like, I could go round for round with him at that point, knowing I couldn't. And we just kind of stared at each other for, I couldn't tell you how long, 30 seconds maybe. And I just turned around and walked away. I didn't know what to do. I was in a state of shock. So we get in the truck and we go home and we talk about it, and, we saw the same thing. A ginger, brown-headed creature, 8.5 to 9 feet tall. We went back the next day and recreated the situation, and he was at least 8'8" plus. But he was brown to gingerish color. He had a flatter nose. I couldn't tell eye color. I couldn't really tell all that with the dark. But there was not a lot of hair around the face. I mean, it was a typical, I guess, what you would picture, truthfully. And looking back at it now, he could have taken 3 steps and pulled me apart. but he didn't, because he had no intention of hurting me. And I had no intention of hurting him, but I stood there kind of in amazement of this creature. He's just hanging out watching me. I guess I was his entertainment for the evening, because we had been out there working on the outside of the camper for 4 or 5 hours. There's no telling how long he was standing there watching us. But we go home, and my roommate goes over there the next day to do some work by himself while I'm doing some family things. And he calls me and he goes, "I'm having rocks thrown at this camper." Now, mind you, this is flat, sandy ground. There's no rocks. I mean, there's acorns, but there's no rocks. And when you get hit by an acorn versus a rock in a tin camper, you can tell the difference. And I tell him, well, go sit on the porch. Don't sit in a tin box and containing yourself. Be vigilant. Maybe we didn't make him too mad yesterday. Well, I get there. We go in the camper. Were there any rocks thrown after I got there?
I think 2 or 3 at the trees.
Yeah.
I think I heard 2 or 3 rocks thrown at the trees when I was walking at the tree line, because I wanted to go and check out where it was. Mm-hmm. And I had a rock thrown to a tree about 4 feet to my right. I was just said, "Hey, don't go on this tree line, otherwise it's going to be bad for you."
Yeah, I can hit this tree. I'm going to hit you if you come any closer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But we had some rocks thrown at us once I got there. And that's when my roommate left and he went back home to North Carolina. So I'm over here working on this camper by myself, dealing with being watched every day by myself. And one night, I am cleaning out the underside of the camper. So I'm kind of in a compartment of this camper with barely my feet touching the ground. And I hear a tree snap. I don't mean like a limb breaking. I mean like a tree snaps. So I come out, but being on edge, I try to approach the situation as rational as possible. But I look out to a downhill slope, and I see an oak tree that's probably 3 or 4 inches in diameter, snapped off at what I could assume to be 5 to 7 feet high, 30 yards away, and I wasn't going to go see how high it was. Because after that tree, it kind of drops off into a valley right there, and I see shoulders and a head of a gingerish brown creature staring back at me. I'm no fool. I know what a broken tree means, and a tree that's alive. I packed up and I got out of there for the day. And periodically throughout the next few weeks, I would notice trees broken at 6 to 8 feet high, just snapped off. We had no storms, no rain, no nothing. And there's nothing that I know of that could snap off a tree at 7 foot high. I think that, along with talking to my dad about the situations that we kind of experienced, we let him in on a little bit of it. He didn't seem too receptive of it, but he seemed to understand what we were dealing with, which makes me come to believe that he knows what's out there. He just doesn't want to talk about it, or he doesn't know how to talk about it. But those are my stories to date. Mostly just having things thrown at me, knocking, talking, and then that big day where we kind of crept into their home, we think.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves in the plow, and the 5-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets. where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.